Back to Dad's on the Air this 7th day of February 2012, and our guest this morning is Kingsley Miller, a father's rights activist from the UK who has, according to Lord Justice Thorpe, Vice President of the UK Family Division, has a history of responsible campaigning and writing on issues relating to family relationships. He has a postgraduate certificate in research methods and is trained in child psychology and child sociology with a teacher's certificate and a master's degree. Kip, good morning.
Hello there, Bill.
I'm sure it is very early for you over there.
Yeah, no matter.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for joining us today. Now, Kip, you've produced Even Toddlers Need Fathers, which is a critique of the principle of maternal deprivation as applied in the UK family courts. I wonder if you could tell us your understanding of maternal deprivation and what you see as what's wrong with it.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me onto your program, Bill. I much appreciate it. I really got involved with fathers' rights about 13, 14 years ago when I had to go to family court about access and contact to my own baby son. And as you say, as a result of that, I produced this book called Even Toddlers Need Fathers. And really, I think the reason that I've been contacted about this is because Dr. McIntosh has produced a set of guidelines on contact and with toddlers and overnight stays.
Yes, I think we have a certain amount of guilt in Australia because Jennifer, Dr. McIntosh comes from our shores, which is I can only apologise that she's landed up or had an influence in England. Yeah,
well, what I thought if it's all right with you, Bill, what I thought I'd like to do is just discuss a little bit about the research background to her guidelines.
Yes.
And look at the guidelines in a bit of detail, and then talk about the research as it presently stands. Is that all right with you, Bill?
That would be great. Thank you.
Right. So, first off, Bill, if you don't mind, what I'll do is I'll try and treat you as though you're a new father, if you like, a new father, and you're not up on all the research background, okay? Is that all right with you as well?
Yes, well, that describes me not too long ago, so that's fine.
Right, well, I think you'd agree with me that when most fathers go into court, family court, they think that their relationship with their child is so special that they're bound to get shared contact or substantial amounts of time. But I've got to say, in research terms, there's no silver bullet. There's no guarantee of shared contact or shared contact order. And what happens in research terms as well, in any way, that it's a bit like if a child's taken away from their father when they're very young, when they can be taken away and adopted by another family, and they grow up quite healthily and happily on their own. But the same applies with a mother. If a child's taken away when they're a baby, they can also grow up quite healthy and happily. In architectural terms, if you were an architect and you talked about the form and function of a house or a building, you sometimes talk about the building being the design of a building being the function and the form of a building reflecting the function. And in research terms, sometimes people think that a mother, because she produces the baby, that makes her a better parent. But just like you can't tell the function of the Sydney Opera House from looking on the outside, there's, in research terms, you can't tell what a parent is like just looking from the outside. Mm. But in the 1950s, along came a guy called John Bowlby, and he had a theory of maternal deprivation. And this is a theory you referred to in your opening question. And he said that there was a qualitative difference between the relationship a child had with his mother than any other person. And in his book, Maternal Care and Mental Health in 1952, he outlined what he saw as the main principles of this theory. First of which was, he said that he described a theory which he called monotropy, in which if the child had a natural or innate relationship with attachment with his primary carer, usually the mother. He also said that there was a critical period in the first 2 or 3 years of his life, or his or her life. And if that bond was broken with the mother during that critical period, then great consequences would ensue for the child. For example, he said that they would become more aggressive, that they would be less intelligent, more depressed, and one of the consequences is dwarfism. And he also talked about affectionless psychopathy in terms of the child also not being as not having his own conscience. At the time, this idea of maternal deprivation in the 50s was very, very popular, and his book, Maternal Care and Mental Health, was translated into Child Care and the Growth of Love and became a bestseller. It was translated over a dozen languages. And if you go online, you'll see Bowlby's name mentioned all over the place. One of the factors that really encouraged his reputation was the fact that it was taken up by the government. It was publicized as the government because they wanted to encourage mothers back into the homes to release jobs for the returning servicemen after the Second World War.
Oh, I hadn't heard that one before. That's an interesting...
Yeah, and what happened was, it was very popular, but what's not so well known, most people have heard of Bowlby, is that even at the time, professional disquiet, and the World Health Organization that published the original work, Maternal Care and Mental Health, they also published a qualification of it in 1962, a reassessment of its effects. And that's where a number of established researchers in the field took issue with him on the point. One of them was, one of them that came along was Professor Sir Michael Rutter, who said, well, one of the points that he pointed out was that children or babies that lose their mothers when they're very young don't grow up with the psychopathic tendencies that Bowlby described. But there were other researchers that came along. For example, in 1960 there was Schaefer and Emerson, and they observed babies with their mothers and fathers, and they realized by studying them that the babies responded to the person that was most sensitive to them. Sometimes that was the mother, and on other times that was the father. But on other times it was the father, even if it was the baby spent more time with the mother. And that was quite an important point in Bowlby's theory of maternal deprivation, which had said it was always an innate or natural quality. Well, if babies respond to the person who's most sensitive to them, that suggests that it's an acquired skill, and that has implications for other professions as well as fathers. But there were other researchers that came along after that. In 1976, there was Park and O'Leary, who looked at mothers and fathers in maternity ward, and they studied the mothers and fathers and found that, contrary to the popular stereotype, fathers were just as involved and as enthusiastic with their babies as the mothers were. Later on in 1980, Park and Swain looked at parents feeding their 3-month-old babies, and they found that fathers responded to their babies' cueing and signaling in just the same way as mothers did, the pacing of the babies as well. So these sorts of things all started to form together. But the main person who Bowlby called his erstwhile critic was Rutter, Michael Rutter. He put these things together, but as I said at the beginning, he was most concerned about the separation aspect. And he realized that babies, when they lost their mothers when they were very, very young, still didn't grow up with these psychopathic tendencies. And he concentrated in his book, Maternal Deprivation Reassessed, at this separation angle. He looked at what caused the anxiety in children when they were separated. And he studied a range of families, using families from the Isle of Wight and London, and looked at the mother being taken away for different reasons. For example, if they were ill, or if they left the family as a consequence of divorce. And he found that the results or the reaction of the children wasn't the same in every circumstance. He tried to isolate what the specific cause was for the the problems with the child. And what he was able to do was isolate the problem. And he decided or discovered that the cause of the problem wasn't the separation at all, the maternal deprivation angle, but it was the discord that occurred at the time. And he went even further. He looked at, was able to gauge in these families the level of discord. So he rated them, this was in the early 70s, from, for example, families where the parents were very frosty towards each other, to high conflict families where they were shouting at each other. And what he discovered that it wasn't that babies or children could cope with low levels of conflict, as Jennifer McIntosh would call them, low levels of conflict, but they couldn't cope with the high conflict. So he put all these things together, and in his book, Maternal Deprivation, he decided that investigations have demonstrated the importance of a child's relationship with people other than his mother. Two, most important of all, there are the repeated findings that many children are not damaged by deprivation. Three, the old issue of critical periods. One of the things that Bowlby had said, of course, is the critical period of development, and the crucial importance of early years has been reopened and re-examined. He said, the evidence is unequivocal that experiences of all ages have an impact. And last of all, he said it may be that the first few years have special importance of bond formation and social development. And that was really Rutter's view of child development as opposed to the Bowlby view of maternal deprivation.
So, Kip, sorry if I just come in there. Were they saying that, was Bowlby saying that that a child would be able to distinguish between its biological mother and perhaps some other female or some other person? Was there some biological link there?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Now, I told you at the beginning you were supposed to not know so much about research, but that's very, very well done. In his, I'm sorry if but that is really the nub of it, because in his monograph, and I think it was 52, it was called The Child's Tie to His Mother, and in that he described how the proximity of the child to the breast, and it was all this physical aspect. And in that particular monograph, when he invented that word monotropy, which meant the link between the mother and the child, and he said there was a very, very definite link. But what I was saying earlier, it was that what research has shown is that the child, in fact, can be taken away, and if it's adopted, it will grow up to be healthy and happy in another family. So the idea, the silver bullet idea that if you go along to family courts, they're bound to give you contact, in research terms, that can't be justified, because there is no sort of innate or indissoluble link. What Rutter's work was showing that the separation, the damage caused at separation, was caused by the conflict, the discord, and that relates to a lot of what Jennifer McIntosh, and you've got your Johnson over there in Australia, who are always on about conflict, and they never refer to the earlier work, seminal work by this guy, and that's why his book, Maternal Deprivation, is so relevant to our topic. And what I want to do now is link that in with the copy of the guidelines. I hope you've got a copy there.
Yes, these are
the Australian Association for Infant Mental Health.
Yes, and
right?
yes, and that's based on what Jennifer McIntosh's contribution on.
Well, let's have a little look, because for the benefit of those at home, it's called Infants and Overnight Care, Post-Separation and Divorce Guidelines for Protecting the Very Young Child's Sense of Comfort and Security. You've got that, have you, Bill?
Yes, I do.
In front of you?
Yes.
Number 1, it says, if parental separation occurs before birth or in the first years of a child's life, special consideration is needed to ensure the continuity of a healthy primary attachment. Well, if I was a father and I saw those guidelines and that first principle, I would be a bit worried. I'd be intimidated by that. But hang on a minute. Rutter has said children are not damaged by separation.
Yes.
Oh, crikey. So that one really, it doesn't really apply. That's wrong.
Yes,
So
it's just straight out wrong, isn't it?
Let's go to number 2, because number 2 can't be wrong. As this may be a very difficult time for all concerned, separated parents may need extra help to understand that frequent fixed overnight shared time parenting schedules during the first years, while well-intentioned, and this is quite serious, may severely disrupt important developmental gains for their young child. Well, that sounds pretty serious. I wouldn't want to go through shared parenting or overnight care if it was going to disrupt important developmental gains. But hang on, once again, that was what Bowlby said. Bowlby said my son would be intellectually impaired, that he would be over-aggressive, that he would be depressed. Bowlby said dwarfism and affectional psychopathy. But Rutter's work showed that children do not suffer as a result of separation. So these are just excuses to stop me having my shared parenting, aren't they? I don't know. Let's go on to number 3. That must be right, number 3. Under the age of 2 years, overnight separations from the primary parent create unique stresses for the infant. Well, all stresses are unique, aren't they, Bill?
That's right.
In the majority of circumstances, it goes on, non-essential overnight separations during these critical months of development are not advisable. Well, there you go. That's straight up. There can't be anything wrong with that. But there we go. Hang on a minute. Rutter said there's no such thing as critical months. You'll hear that social workers and family court welfare officers talk about critical periods and windows of opportunity. But Rutter said that all experiences at all ages of children are important. He got into hot water because he said Sure Start programs that focus on the first couple of years aren't necessarily the best thing, because children, what happens if a child gets ill at the age of 4? And what he focused on was the fact that some experiences at all ages are important to children. So those first 3 things on the guidelines are basically not right.
I just, in 3, as you quoted before, I like the non-essential. I think you'd suddenly find that everything is non-essential when there's a question of an overnight separation. And
then, so that's the first part of these guidelines. And then if I ask you to turn over to 4.2, then we go into furthermore, for the listeners at home, we're going over the next page, and 4.2 it says, furthermore, the young child's parents should be able to have civil conversations together with the child. And it goes on about how the relationships between parents necessarily have to be equitable. But again, what they're doing here is they're referring to the earlier Rutter research. This cites back to the Rutter research, which said discord was bad for children. And as Rutter showed, it's high conflict that is bad for children. And what they're doing, what these guidelines are doing, is by association, they're trying to correlate the problems with discord or conflict with the idea of psychology being, shared parenting being, or overnight stays being necessarily bad for children. By associating those 2 different paradigms, what they're trying to do is discredit the theory of shared parenting and overnight stays. If so what she's tried to do, what they've tried to do there is link 2 things that are shouldn't be linked. Correlate the what Rutter has shown, the discord aspect of it, which is wrong for children, especially high conflict, and she's tried to link that with the idea of there being some sort of psychological, these Bowlby elements, but they shouldn't really be together. Conflict is one thing that should be dealt with the courts. Shared parenting and overnight stays is another thing. There's nothing wrong with overnight stays or in principle or contact with the other parent. Rutter has shown that in his work. And but the only reason that conflict might be a problem is that if they're high conflict families. And what she's tried to do is by association, by pushing these things together, suggesting a correlation, which there isn't one. Another technique, if I may say, that she's used is something called bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is a thing that you find in American law when they try and convict someone on a very serious offence and haven't got enough evidence. What they do is they search around for a lesser offence and then they stick that with it. And that's called bootstrapping.
I think that's how they got Al Capone into jail, isn't it? With the tax offence.
Tax offence. That's one. That's an example. Well, in this case, what McIntosh does is she says to make the guidelines seem objective and impartial, she says the primary caregiver can be male or female. Okay, so therefore it's objective. But then what she says, she adopts this principle of monotropy, which is from Bowlby's work, to say, yes, to make it appear objective and impartial. But then she goes on to say, but you can only have one primary caregiver, and that's the bootstrapping to the original. And if you get a jury of 6 men and 6 women, and you say, look, you can either choose the man or the woman, so this is not gender bias, and then say to them, but when the baby comes along, you can only pick one of them, the monotropy aspect, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to pick the woman. So by bootstrapping the idea of monotropy to the idea of primary caregiver, she's really trying to push through her own ideas about child development. If we go on to the, I think you've also got there the clinical and research perspectives. So the people at home, hopefully they're still listening. Infants in overnight care, there's a sheet that she's prepared which gives her justification for these guidelines. And if I refer you to the last sentence in the first paragraph, Bill, It says the paper briefly outlines new evidence in this area and considers implications for the management of post-separation parenting plans for very young children. Okay? So that's the basis of these papers, the justification. Jennifer McIntosh, and her name's put to this paper. But if we turn over, she quotes from two extracts from an edition from the Family Court Journal, which she was the special editor for. So she edited a special edition of a journal, a pretty academic journal called Family Law Review, and she's quoted, can you see on the second page the 2 quotes?
Yes.
And the first one she's quoted from Shaw, okay? And this paper, the special edition, was on attachment, and all the people that contributed the paper came from a Bowlby tradition. She's quite open about it, and you can go online and check this all, the Family Court Review, and put in the search words Bowlby and McIntosh, and it'll come up with the paper, and you can read these for yourself. And then the first bit, it says, attachment in the first year of life, when the brain circuits for attachments are still setting up, is different than attachment in the 3rd and 4th year of life, when the system is going, so to speak. That is to stress a developmental system while it is organizing in the first year will have a much more negative impact in response to the same stressor than if you did when the child was 4. And basically, she's using this quotation to justify her own idea, or Bowlby's idea, of a critical period in the first 3 or 4 years. In fact, the person that cited Shaw is quoted in her own paper in this journal as the American Bowlby. So what we can see is that she's using justification, Bowlby's justification. Apparently, according to the first page, it said this paper briefly outlines new evidence, but in reality we're seeing is that she's repackaged some very old stuff, very dated stuff on child development in a different way, basically. This guy, who she's quoted there, Shaw, is known as the American Bowlby, and therefore we can see that her guidelines and her justification are based on the discredited theory of maternal deprivation. If we go down even further, the only other extract is from another guy from her special edition, Shrew. He's a very well-respected psychologist, and he really tears into shared parenting. He believes that shared time parenting with infants and preschool children is likely to create a set of additional risks that, if not necessary, should be avoided. You are simply making the infant's job harder. The infant's job is to try to organize their behavior to make the world to be a predictable and understandable place where they can get their needs met and won't be too stressed, so on and so forth. And if you refer to his actual papers, as I say, if you go online and put in the word Shrew with McIntosh and Bowlby,
that's spelled S. I'll just so if you want to look that up, it's spelled S-R-O-U-F-E, Shrew.
Thank you very much. And basically, I've got if you go to his paper, Bill, it's full of sexist references there's a particular aspect that talks about mothers being responsible for the development of children when they're very young, and fathers being responsible for them when they get older, for the transition to college and then to the outside life and the work environment. That's the sort of terms his paper talks in terms of, okay? And they also mention the fact that when in early years the father should be given a couple of hours a week, 2 or 4 hours a week, just to keep him involved, if you like, with the child. Well, let me make it clear to you, Bill, on the phone. I'm not campaigning on behalf of fathers for tokenism. I'm not doing this because of my ego. I'm doing this because I think that children need both parents, and that is a very important aspect of this, my writing and research and whatever, is to emphasize the fact that the father as well as the mother are important to children at all ages.
Yes, and you're supported in your view by eminent people such as Professor Richard Warshak, who would also would support that view, who's far more eminent in this field than our own Jennifer McIntosh, I suggest.
Bill, if you can get him on the line, you put this to him and tell me what he thinks about this. And I'm going to give you this quote, and then I'm going to ask you a question in a minute about it, okay? Because this makes my blood boil, okay? This is what Sruth says in the article. Mothers carried this baby. That is a different deal. We, in brackets, men, did not. We cannot nurse. It is a different deal. Well, you know, Bill, I'm sorry. I am a bit of a wimp. You can probably tell over the phone in the interview that I'm a bit of a wimp. And I understand, all right? The Australian rugby team is as hard as nails, and their cricket team is even harder. But this is my question to you. Does this mean that as fathers they can't nurse their own children, Bill?
Yeah, look, it certainly doesn't, and in fact, it's interesting you talk about the rugby and the cricket teams, but there's a procession of articles where the fathers will not play a test match, for instance, if their child is about to be born. It's now quite accepted.
Why? That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. But this phrase here makes my blood boil. We men did not. We cannot nurse. And really, we can use McIntosh's justification, that second page I asked you to get, okay, which is her justification for those guidelines. And what I've tried to show you is a line of reasoning from the first 3 principles to show you how she relied on Bowlby. Then we looked at this justification paper and saw how she referred to 2 specific authors. One author cites back to Bowlby as a discredited theory, and the second author that she refers to, this Ruth guy, says that men can't nurse. So her, ultimately, was saying that these guidelines and her theory of child development is based on now a discredited theory, and I would go further, it's discredited, and it's a sexist theory. I said at the beginning that I wanted to just bring you up to date with current research. I've been online and I've looked up a video on the current research, with the real way that the actually see things. And there's a video here. It's one that I tried to get the copyright on, but they wouldn't give me the copyright, so it's not on my channel. It's not one of my videos. It's somebody else's. It's called The Father of Modern Child Psychiatry on Gene-Environment Interactions. Gene is G-E-N-E, Bill, okay? Gene-Environment Interactions. And believe it or not, it's by Professor Sir Michael Rutter, okay? And he was appearing as a guest speaker at a conference in Heidelberg in Germany in November 2011, okay?
Yes. And
basically, what he says is that the questioner, and I mention this because it's relevant, because the questioner says, you know, it takes a whole village to raise a child. And what I'm really now trying to do is, for your listeners at home, contrast the modern, up-to-date approach to child parenting to that Bowlby idea about that we talked about earlier on. So the questioner says he's exaggerating for effect, but he says it takes a whole village to raise a child, and Rutter says it is important to see children are part of families and families are part of the community. He goes on to say one needs to have multiple opportunities of relationships. So it is a good thing, as it is with anything. You don't want to put everything all on one thing.
Yes.
Challenge and stress is a normal part of life. And in the same way you don't have good physical health if you don't have contact with germs, you develop good health by being exposed and coping. So it's in the context of that framework which I'm referring to now, which sees the child as this independent individual who, in the shared parenting and overnight care, experiences these stresses in a safe environment, learns to cope with that stress. Because when it comes to the greatest stresses in later life, for example, appearing on a radio program like this, they might be able to cope with it better than I am. Okay.
Well, Kip, look, I hope we haven't stressed you too much, but unfortunately we're running out of time. If people want to find out some more, I presume if they Google even toddlers need fathers, they can get some more information.
Yeah.
And
the last sentence on what Rutter says is we need to help children cope with the challenges they face, but not prevent them meeting challenges, because that is part of growing up.
Absolutely.
All right, Bill?
Well, look, Kip Miller, a father's rights activist from the UK, thank you very much for being on the program. And we asked you...
Thank you for having me, Bill.
We asked you if you'd like to pick a song.
Pleasure.
We asked you if you'd like to pick a song to go out with, Kip. As we're saying thank you, would you like to just introduce your choice?
Yeah, this is Andrew Gold, Lonely Boy.
Thanks again, Kip. We'll be in touch.
Cheers, Bill.
Bye-bye.